Why is it that the moment you finally wake up, you feel more adrift than ever? You saw through the illusion, the roles, the noise, the endless striving. You glimpsed the truth, and everything fell silent. But it wasn't the peace you imagined. It was something else. A stillness so vast, it swallowed even your desire to move. You're not sad. You're not broken. You just no longer care to chase what once felt urgent. And that silence, it lingers, sacred, haunting, heavy in your chest. No one tells you that spiritual awakening doesn't fuel your ambition. It drains it. Because the fuel you ran on, praise, achievement, identity, no longer burns. The spark that once kept you running fades. Not with violence, but with reverence. As if your soul turned down the volume, so you could finally hear the quiet voice beneath the noise. And now you wonder, was something lost? Or is something deeper waiting to be found? This is the paradox of awakening. You see the truth, and it empties you. But maybe, just maybe, that emptiness isn't the end. It's the space where something real begins to speak. The common experience, numbness after awakening. At first, it feels like freedom, like stepping barefoot into silence after escaping a burning room you didn't know you were trapped in. The noise is gone, the masks fall, and for a moment, it feels sacred, pure, as if life is finally breathing in alignment with your soul. But then, slowly, something begins to fade, not with chaos, but with quiet, meaning, once so sharp and bright, begins to dissolve, not in a crash, but like mist at dawn. Your old dreams, your ambitions, your hunger to achieve, they lose their taste. And you're not in pain, exactly. You're not sad, not broken. You just don't care anymore. Not out of despair, but from something deeper, something softer, something still. It's as if your soul turned off the lights and then forgot to turn them back on. You look around and the world keeps moving, the hustle, the noise, the praise. But none of it calls you the way it once did. There is a hollowness, but not the kind that needs to be filled. More like space, a pause, a breath you didn't know you were holding. And in that silence, a strange question echoes. If I'm awake now, why does everything feel so distant? But maybe, just maybe, this isn't emptiness. Maybe this is the space before a new truth takes root. A sacred stillness where the soul prepares to speak. In a voice you've never truly heard before. The Jungian lens. This isn't failure, it's transformation. So you're here, in the stillness that followed awakening. The world no longer pulls at you. The urgency is gone. The hunger is quiet. And yet, a question lingers. What's wrong with me? But Carl Jung saw this moment not as collapse, but as sacred. He called it the threshold, the space between the ego falling and the self beginning to rise. Your ego hasn't died. It's simply disoriented. The map it lived by, praise, performance, productivity, no longer makes sense. The old compass stopped pointing anywhere, and so you float. But floating is not failing. This is not regression. It is a transformation in its rawest form. You are in the chrysalis, that silent, dissolving middle place where the caterpillar loses all shape to become what it cannot yet imagine. Our culture doesn't understand this space. It calls it apathy, depression, laziness. But Jung knew better. He saw it as individuation, the soul's slow and sacred emergence into wholeness. This isn't the end of your story. It's the moment before the self begins to speak. A new center is forming. but it cannot rise from urgency. It needs stillness. It needs surrender. And so you wait, not passively, but with quiet reverence for the shape of your real self to take form. This is not dysfunction. This is the deep reordering of everything you once called you. And beneath that silence, something ancient is stirring. The hidden pain, not depression, but sacred pause. And so, you find yourself in the in-between, not asleep, not quite awake, suspended in a silence that feels both tender and terrifying. The ego has stepped back, the self hasn't stepped in. And in that gap, a strange kind of ache begins to unfold. It's not sadness in the usual sense. It's not even despair. It's something quieter, like standing in the ruins of an old life, knowing you can't go back, but not yet knowing how to go forward. You're not lazy. You're not lost. You're in retreat, but not out of weakness. The soul retreats when the world no longer mirrors the truth it now carries. It pulls back, not to disappear, but to realign. And in that sacred retreat, a void opens. Not the kind of void that swallows you in darkness, but one that waits patiently. A space vast enough for something new to be born. Not pathological, but potent. Not dysfunction, but descent. And descent, Jung reminds us, is not failure. It is holy. It is the soul's way of shedding what no longer serves. But the pain of this pause is real, because everything familiar begins to fall away. The identities, the goals, the roles you played to feel loved, seen, enough. And in their absence, you're left with you, raw, unscripted, uncertain. It feels like nothing, but it is everything. This pause is not your end. It is the ground preparing itself for your truth to take root. The soil of stillness where your next becoming will rise. So sit with it, breathe into it, and trust that this silence is not empty. It's sacred. Insight deepens. The old motives are dying. And slowly, you begin to see it. The things that once moved you don't. The rush for success, they need to be seen. The hunger to prove, to achieve, to be somebody. All of it begins to dissolve. Not because you've become indifferent, but because you've become honest. Those desires weren't yours. They were the voice of the mask you wore. The one you built to survive in a world that never really saw you. The one that chased applause, just to feel real. Jung called it the persona, a socially crafted version of you, a behavior system shaped by expectation, not essence. And once you see the mask, you can't wear it again, not comfortably, not without knowing the cost, because now you feel the weight of every smile that isn't yours. You sense the emptiness behind every goal that was born from fear. You taste the hollowness in every yes you never meant to say. This is the moment the old engine dies. You don't run on validation anymore. You don't burn for recognition. You don't need to be enough, because something deeper within you already is. But this death of old motives doesn't feel triumphant. It feels quiet, uncertain, like standing in a familiar room that suddenly doesn't belong to you. You haven't failed. You've simply outgrown the story you were never meant to keep living. And now, there's space for something true to begin. Breakthrough insight. The ego dissolves, the self awakens. And here's the moment that changes everything. When you finally realize, the fire didn't die because you were weak. It went out because the fuel was never meant to last. You didn't lose your drive. You outgrew the engine. The ego, with all its urgency, its roles, its need to become, begins to dissolve. Not with drama, not with noise, but with quiet surrender. And in its place, something softer arrives, something ancient, something alive, the self. Not the self the world shaped, but the one that was always waiting beneath the surface, the one that doesn't chase, but calls. The self doesn't push, it doesn't yell, it whispers, it pulls, gently, steadily, without explanation. You're not driven anymore. You're being drawn toward what feels real, toward what resonates, toward what asks nothing of you, but truth. You begin to notice it in small ways, a subtle shift in what moves you, a deeper pause before you say yes, a growing intolerance for anything false. This isn't motivation as you once knew it. It's not adrenaline. It's not ambition. It's alignment. And once it begins, you realize this is what you've been waiting for. Not the next success, not the next title, but this, a life moved not by pressure, but by presence. The in-between, ego is gone, but self hasn't fully arrived. So here you are, suspended in a space that has no name. The ego has loosened its grip. The old motives no longer stir you, but the self hasn't yet fully taken root. You're in the in-between. This is the liminal, the unseen doorway between what was and what is becoming. The goo phase of transformation, as the mystics say, where the caterpillar dissolves completely. No wings yet, no form, just raw becoming. You feel formless, directionless, sometimes even foreign to your own reflection. And that's the truth no one talks about. Awakening doesn't always feel like light. Sometimes it feels like getting lost in your own silence. But Jung understood this deeply. He called it the negredo, the blackening phase in alchemy, a sacred dissolution before rebirth. This isn't a void to fear. It's a womb. You haven't failed. You haven't stalled. You are in sacred pause. Not because nothing is happening, but because something profound is unfolding beneath the surface. A reweaving of your inner world. This is where meaning begins to emerge, not through effort, but through presence. Not by pushing, but by listening. And though it may feel like nothing is solid, what's really fading is everything that was never truly you. Hold still here. This isn't the end. It's the space just before the wings. Shadow rising, facing what you've repressed. And just when you thought the silence might break into light, something darker stirs. The shadow begins to rise, but not as a curse, not as punishment. It rises to be seen. Grief, anger, unmet needs, old wounds still echoing beneath your calm exterior. They emerge, not to torment you, but to be honored. Because now, finally, you are still enough to face them. You're no longer outrunning your past, no longer numbing the ache. There's space now, in this sacred pause, for what was once buried to return, not as enemies, but as messengers. Each feeling carries a truth you once had to suppress just to survive. Each emotion is a fragment of the self you weren't yet ready to hold. And now, the soul is making room. This is the deeper work, not transcendence, not bliss, but integration. Jung taught that we don't find wholeness by chasing the light, but by bringing light into the darkness. The shadow isn't something to overcome, it's something to reclaim. So if old pain is surfacing, it's not regression, it's an invitation to meet yourself more fully, to love what was once unloved, to bring every part of you into the light of your own awareness. This is not destruction. This is a deep repair. And what rises from this meeting isn't more pain, it's more truth. New energy emerges, a quieter kind of motivation. Then, quietly, something begins to stir. Not a firestorm, not a sudden surge, but a faint, steady pulse, like the earth humming beneath your feet. It isn't urgency, it isn't pressure. It's not the voice of your old ambition shouting for results. It's something softer, something cleaner. A different kind of motivation begins to emerge, not born from lack, not driven by the fear of falling behind, but moved from within. This isn't the desire to impress, it's the pull toward what feels right. You begin to move, not because you're supposed to, but because to not move would feel like betrayal. Not betrayal of others, but of your own truth. This is a soul-led movement. It doesn't roar, it doesn't demand applause, it whispers and waits for you to listen. You find yourself creating, not to be seen, but because the idea won't let you sleep. You speak, not to convince, but because silence would cost too much. You help, not out of duty, but because something in you overflows. This is what it means to be aligned, not motivated by fear, but by resonance, not performing for approval, but responding to something deeper, the call of your own becoming. Realignment, from ambition to devotion. This new energy, it's not loud. It doesn't come crashing in like your old ambition did. It arrives quietly, like breath, like memory. It doesn't roar, it hums. It doesn't strive, it aligns. You stop chasing outcomes. You start listening for what calls you inward, no longer pulled by external measures of success. You begin to feel guided by something subtler, something sacred. Your need to achieve softens into a desire to serve. Not in the way the world defines service, but in the way the soul longs to offer itself honestly, without needing reward. What once felt like ambition now feels like devotion. Not devotion to image or praise or results, but devotion to truth, to inner resonance, to the quiet knowing that you're finally walking your own path, not one borrowed from fear. And somehow, this devotion moves mountains, without urgency, without force. You find yourself showing up more fully, doing the work, not because you have to, but because not doing it would feel like turning away from something holy. This is realignment. You're no longer trying to be something. You're simply becoming who you are, in your own rhythm, in your own way. And that is more powerful than anything ambition ever promised. So if you find yourself in the fog, where drive has vanished and the silence feels endless, know this: you are not lost. You are not broken. You are being reformed. The fire didn't die. It burned away everything that was never truly you. This isn't emptiness. It's sacred space, preparing you for something real to emerge. You didn't fail. You simply stepped out of the life you were performing and into the life that's waiting to be lived. The path ahead won't be loud. It won't be rushed. It will ask for honesty, presence, and patience with the parts of you still unfolding. This is not the end of your awakening. It's the quiet beginning of your becoming. And somewhere inside this stillness, your truest voice is beginning to speak. Not in words, but in feeling, in alignment, in peace. Listen closely. It's already guiding you home. If this awakened something in you, like, share, comment. Your voice could be the light in someone else's dark. Let it be heard.